Hello, everybody, and welcome to Spilling the Spirituality. I'm Hilary, and there's my pal Rob.
Hi, how are you?
Rob.
Good morning and hello to everyone.
Yeah, today we are discussing because we're still on our sort of uncomfortable series. And today we're discussing getting vulnerable, being vulnerable, all sides of it. Um, what does vulnerability mean?
So, the dictionary definition that I have of vulnerability says that it is an openness or susceptibility to attack or harm. Uh, and these are all kind of related. Willingness to show emotion or allow one's weaknesses to be seen or known. Willingness to risk being emotionally hurt. Yeah, and I think for the purposes of our discussion today, I think that's the one that we really are. Those first two are the ones that we're really focusing on. Being open to or susceptible to being attacked or harmed. I think that's the first one, maybe physically. And then the second one, to show emotion or allow one's weaknesses to be shown in a way that's, of course, being open to being attacked or harmed as well, emotionally hurt. So we're talking about expressing our emotions in a way that is a risk for potential hurt um, for us, but also has the opportunity for a great amount of gain and intimacy as a result.
Yes, yes. And we were talking about what would possibly be examples. And one of the things that I was saying is like I feel vulnerable every time we come on and do these shows because you don't know who's going to listen, and I feel vulnerable from a how I look stage to how will people perceive the two of us and what we're saying. I was telling Rob, I make these reels, and like when I'm not wearing makeup and I look like, not so great, sometimes I'll force myself to make the reels, but then when I post them, I'll add a filter because I'm like, who's gonna watch that? But at the same time, I'm vulnerable because I come on I do these things, I allow my hair to be its natural color, so that shows that I'm older. Can you dig, Rob?
I really can't, and I think having just started kind of on this process of being uh, or having internet streams or recordings posted, I mean, that really does bring out that feeling of being vulnerable. Uh, you, we do put ourselves out there in this way. It also reflects kind of what we feel has or how we feel vulnerable in the world. Like we did an exercise, for instance, last season where we took off the filters for our live stream, and and that was about a discussion in authenticity. And I think going beyond that is for the purposes of today, because I felt uncomfortable, and I still do feel uncomfortable. Kind of, I have my filters turned down like just to the smallest degree of filtering. I would love to be able to do it more, but I'm fascinated with the idea that I I am uncomfortable with turning that filter completely off. I, like you, am uh, concerned about what my face really looks like if you can see all of the wrinkles and just instead of some of them. I don't want to like turn the filter all the way up because that would feel totally disingenuous, but I don't want to turn it all the way down because I want to be able to have a few and appear like I'm as close to my age, only looking great as possible. So I think it's wrapped up in this idea of shame that we've been talking about, because if we do go out there without, we can speak metaphorically, if we go out there without makeup or filters or some sort of protection, a mask, uh, why do we feel uncomfortable with that? Why do we feel uncomfortable being who we really are? do we feel shame for that? To go back to last week's discussion, why would I feel shame for a natural process like aging?
Right.
What am I trying to show you as my friend, or as a viewing or a listening audience? What is that all about, and why? What am I choosing to share that is vulnerable? And
Well, and
how do I
certainly,
aid?
our media has really, you know, has made, at least I'll just speak for women, us feel that if we, aren't looking airbrushed and have the latest and the greatest to make us look younger, then we don't look good. We don't celebrate age a lot of times in our culture. So if I don't have makeup on and you can see my sunspots on my face, which I definitely have all over here. My concern is that, well, will people listen? Will people watch? Or will they say, oh, that old lady, I'm not gonna, social media is a young person's game.
So they
Um,
tell us, but no, I totally relate to that. I and in the end, it's I mean, because you don't have to be online to have this. You have this about wearing makeup before you leave the house, or
right,
whatever you got to do to leave, you got to be a certain way or present yourself a certain way.
right,
And then for me, it's like the big issue is then why would I be uncomfortable if I threw on my whatever my all my old clothes to run to the grocery store, and I run into somebody and I'm not dressed the way I would like to be presented. Um, what is about that? What is about wanting to be filtered and not appear older that makes us uncomfortable? In
right.
the end, we can say, well, people are going to think something of me, but isn't it really about we're afraid to look at ourselves as uh, people who are aging, who have expiration date on our material and physical life? Is that what that's where the vulnerability I think really comes, which
Yeah.
is, oh, I have to look at myself or have others look at me and know that I am on this path that no one can get off of. It's is part of who we are.
And the sad thing is, I don't think it's just with aging. I mean, if I look back over my life, I felt that way most of my life. I never really celebrated how I looked, and it's silly. And then of course you look back at old pictures and you're like, man, why was I so hard on myself? I look pretty good. But again, I still think that's conditioning, and that was long before social media.
Absolutely. I mean, and if we take it back, bigger than how we're aging, it's like, how do we express ourselves to the people that we care about? Do we feel comfortable expressing the truth of our feelings? Again, taking it beyond the authenticity discussion, it's like, okay, so we're authentic, but what are the consequences of that? Which I feel like is where this vulnerability discussion comes in. Once we've laid bare something that most people don't know, or that it has this potential to bring us closer to that person, or the vulnerability comes in the fact that we're risking the fact that that person might reject us because of this experience. And so we are risking being hurt.
Yeah.
But
So here's a good example with that. I have this habit of telling the people that I care about that I love them a lot. With some, like, Rob and I are both kind of similar. So like I could say I love Rob. We always say goodbye that way. Like, I love you, see you later. I get it when you have that going back and forth, your significant other, your kids, whatever. But I tend to, like, a lot of times I feel stuff in my heart, and like I'll feel like in this moment, like, wow, I really care about this friend or something. So I might say I love them, and I can see and feel this discomfort in them when I say it. And I'm not trying to say it to like make them feel uncomfortable. It literally just falls out of my mouth, like, because I really feel that. And it's interesting to me how, for a lot of people, those are really hard words to say, right?
yeah, and if I pay attention to how many times I say the words "I love you," and or like what happens so often now is, love you, or I saying those three words and looking at somebody and saying them is a powerful thing. And I think it makes people vulnerable to hear them, but to say those three words in that way, like I realize how many times I say love you when I'm on an email or when I'm on, sending a note or a
Yeah.
text or even just in person, but also paying attention to how many times I say the word specifically, I love you, which I think is this step to is a vulnerable step it's even greater, because I've now taken the risk that you won't feel the same way.
Right.
Actually,
Right.
like saying love you to somebody, it's a greeting that they can say back, but saying, oh, I love you or I love us, as a thing, um, is something that I enjoy doing when I feel like you. Like I feel like I like to express it that way. It's also a risk, even with
Yes.
friendships,
Most
like,
of the time I don't even, this may sound weird. I don't even care what the response is. Of course I would care if it was like my partner, but because it truly is authentic coming from me. I don't throw those words around. And most of the time people don't say, because I think I use it a lot. So maybe they might just be like, okay, bye, that
right.
kind of thing. And I don't, it's totally fine. I think, it all depends, I guess, on what kind of person you are. But I definitely think there's a vulnerability there with those words. I know for people who can't say it, it must feel massively vulnerable.
And it must feel vastly vulnerable if you've said it to somebody and they really don't feel the same way. And I always feel like if you can say it to somebody and really don't care because you're expressing something that is so, it's a truth to you, that it's their your love of them is not based on whether they love you or not. I think that is a very freeing experience.
Yeah.
um and even expressing any emotions present this risk that you are being real about yourself, that taking the risk of being authentic, which is important. So I can feel I'm living authentically, but then what happens if the life that unfolds as a result of this authenticity is not the way I wanted it to be?
Right.
I think that's where the vulnerability aspect of uh, it kicks in, because I've made myself vulnerable regardless of what the outcome is. And this is where I am enriching myself. This is where, so the experience I get is not one of, well, I'm going to stop expressing myself because I got hurt. But the growth comes from when I can say, well, I expressed myself, but I was me, and I'm not going to ever not do that.
Right.
And then I'm living authentically, and then I'm being very vulnerable because it's not dependent on, I'm not hiding anything. I'm not feeling shame about anything. I'm not feeling shame that I care about you more than you care about me,
Right.
or that we may be two different people, and you may never see how this could work out as a friendship or a relationship, but I don't care.
Yeah.
'Cause, you know,
And then, sometimes I think about social media, not just how you look, but like social media when people put stuff out there. So social media in general, it seems like is mostly like, hey, look at me, and like, look how great my life is. But sometimes, people have a lot of raw moments where they put out something about themselves that they're going through a struggle. And that is very vulnerable too. And it's interesting when you look at that, because sometimes you're like not sure how to respond. Do I respond in a way that, like, what are they seeking? Are they seeking like, no, you're great, or are they seeking like, I see you, or like, that's an interesting one too.
and I think it's all such a fine line, because I do think most of us are putting stuff out there for an ICU experience, for someone to say, that's great, or get support, or you've shown me something and I'm going to say I've been there too. And so we think, and so there's a rush from that I've been there as well. And so we can start sharing things that others might consider an overshare. I know that I feel like there's a fine line between realizing someone's expressed vulnerability in what they think is authentic, and someone has overshared something, and I'm feeling manipulated to respond to it. And I don't even know the difference that I could tell you what it is for me, but it is a fine line. But it
Right.
also makes me very conscious of what I'm sharing as well. Like, I want to be able to share when I'm clear about what I'm seeking. Do I want support? Do I love when I get birthday wishes on Facebook? Absolutely. Do I think Facebook is the greatest thing ever for birthday wishes? Absolutely,
Right.
because I do love uh, being vulnerable enough to say, I love birthday wishes. I don't even need gifts, just
Yeah, you feel
up on
good. You feel like lots of people love you.
right. And if you've, and chances are, if you've said something, you do. And, you know,
Meh,
yeah,
I'm not so sure about that.
well,
Especially because, when you, especially with Facebook, when you go into Facebook, the notifications, it'll say it's this person's birthday, it's this person's birthday, it's this person. I've been on Facebook long enough to see that there are lots of people who every day like fill in the happy birthday, and it's the same message for every single person,
right.
like I try not to wish someone a happy birthday unless it's somebody that I'm truly connected to, or that I feel it for, or whatever. But I don't know, man. I don't know. Well, we're getting into another topic because I don't know that that's about vulnerability, but
But the sharing part of it, um, uh, my, how much am I sharing of myself in a public way that it is vulnerability, or is that it is I'm looking to get a response from those people that I'm sharing with. Last week I sent out a newsletter, 2 weeks ago, where I wrote in my normal intro to my newsletter that I was having a back issue and that blah blah blah, I was in pain. So when I wrote it, I was thinking, I'm writing this so that my readers or viewers know what's going on with me. I don't want to lie and say, hey, everything's great this week, when I talk about, changing our thoughts or changing our, to change our life. This
yeah,
was a moment that I was sending out something that I didn't necessarily feel like great. I thought I was being honest and to some degree vulnerable. But even in those couple of paragraphs, I took the idea, and I don't even know how I managed to do this in just a short, with a short amount of words, but kind of hammer it so much that I read it afterwards and thought, well, that's, I wasn't looking to do what actually I feel like it ended up coming out like, oh, woe is me. Oh, that's too bad. Or I wasn't looking, or I thought I wasn't looking for sympathy, but I had hammered this idea so much that I feel like I confused being vulnerable with now getting validation or unnecessary um, pity or whatever.
yeah, but maybe you felt vulnerable because then you were getting a reaction. Because I feel this way too. Like you feel vulnerable, you share, and then when you get back all the like, oh, I'm so sorry, I hope you feel better. It's almost like we can't accept it. It's almost like we are don't let ourselves stay vulnerable. It's like we can do it when it's controlled. Like, okay, I'm going to tell everybody that I'm having a hard time, but when people respond to us, we can't take it in. That's almost what I think it
Right. Which is why you might not want to be vulnerable. Some people might not want to be vulnerable. Right. And
is.
I feel like when I do it, you're right. I think the vulnerability comes from being willing to be either supported the way that you've put it out there or rejected completely. Like, those are the options. And
You know what I think it is? Sorry. I think it's, I think it's when that comes back to us. I know for me, it makes me feel weak, and I don't want to come off as weak. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. You hurt your back, sending prayers your way or whatever. And everybody's saying that. And you're like, geez, it's not that bad. You're like, you don't want
right.
to be perceived as weak. That's what I that's what I feel that it might be why we close up. We open up enough to share it, and then we close up to receive it, because then we would be weak.
Yeah, truly. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing about putting out humble brags, or putting out something that seems like it's a worse problem. How do you frame what's actually happening to you, and then those responses. There have been times that, like, so when my parents died, for instance, like I did put it up there in a public forum because I did appreciate the support, because it was coming from people that I both knew well and didn't know well, but I just loved that the world, a lot of people that supported me that I may have not known as well may have lost parents, and so when they said, "I'm so sorry, I understand I've been through it," that really meant a lot to me. Versus, as I was telling you before, I used to be a person that put up, "Oh, having a cold today," or "not feeling it," or something that was very vague booking about how I felt, that elicited, "Oh, I hope you feel better. I hope." And my husband really, he hates that kind of feeling, like, if feeling manipulated by the world, telling them that they're sick or they're whatever. There are times I didn't need support about having a cold, but what was the message I'm sending something else entirely, like, just so you know, if I'm not responding to you, I'm using it as I'm leveraging my own situation for some sort of other outcome, and I think it's being vulnerable, but I'm actually not. It's actually the opposite. I'm putting it up
Yeah.
as a defense rather than a vulnerability.
Yeah. I think that vulnerability, that's the thing. It's like we want we want to be seen and heard, but then when we are, it feels uncomfortable. And that's when we push it away. It's sort of you know, um, like if you go to hug someone, like I have some, I'm not going to say names. I have some, family members that are male that, I'll be like, and they'll be like, "Mm, okay, whatever." And like, I think it's too hard to let it in. Why is it too hard to let it in? Is it too hard because they don't feel like they love themselves enough to allow someone else to love them? I mean, look, I do it in my marriage sometimes. My husband will come to me, like so like loving, and I'll be like, yeah, by the way, our light, it went out or whatever. Like I'll push it away. I think it's like we can't accept the love. That's too vulnerable.
Yeah, and again, the risk of you responding that way, that then they might, there's the risk of, again, being hurt or being smothered in some way, being rejected completely, or someone kind of responding in a way that's too overwhelming. Like, we want to be able to control the response. And I I think being ready to receive whatever happens is the key to it, because you're doing it because you can't not be vulnerable, because you don't want to be inauthentic. You
Yeah.
can't go on not not expressing the real you. And I do think there's a fine line between people who have chosen to create intimacy by being vulnerable. So I'm going to share something with you, and you're going to share something with me, or I'm going to share something with our listeners or viewers
Yeah.
that makes them feel closer to me, because it's a relationship. It brings us together. It's an accessibility thing, versus like, I'm going to just start hammering all these things, and it's going to look like I got that all these things are happening to me, and woe is me, or I'm sick, and I got bad luck, or I'm always sharing stories that are, this happened to me again. Then I think that that's made a vulnerability an armor, in a way. The opposite has happened. I'm
Yeah.
so much of this drama that you don't really know is what is important to me, what I'm really upset about, or what I'm hurting about, because everything seems
Right.
to be right.
But it's still maybe it's not our place to judge it, and maybe we just it's still an invitation for me then to be vulnerable somewhere else, like even if it has ulterior motives, it's still showing, it's still being candid with some things in their life. And I guess what I would say about this, because I always think, okay, what's the takeaway here? And what I would say is that we're all connected. We say this all the time, we're all connected. So we want to like allow that connection to happen. And when I show my vulnerability, what I'm saying, I mean, my whole thrust, we've talked about this before, with doing all of this is to show our audience that I am just like you. I suffer like you. I have good days. I have bad days. I would never want anyone to think that I'm above all of this, or I've mastered it, or I've figured it out. So when I show my vulnerability, it's an invitation to you to show yours. And as a result, we connect more as a world.
Right. There's an intimacy that comes from that sharing of vulnerability. And um, I feel like that's the key. It's only been recently that I know what it feels like to not overshare or to not share something because I want somebody to respond a certain way, but to really just share just because it's important for me to share with you. I think that is for me where I feel like I've laid myself out there, and whatever happens, happens. And it could bring us closer or it could separate us more. But that space where I don't know what's going to happen is that space where I've been vulnerable, is that space that I'm open. And I think that's where the growth happens because you've surrendered to whatever is going to come after that in your authenticity.
Yeah. And
Surrender to the consequences.
it's uncomfortable. I think it's great. Like the more we become vulnerable, the more, and we don't like analyze, or judge, like why is this person saying this or whatever. We just allow it. The more things start to change, because I was thinking about like, when you gather a group of people together and you say to them, and you think to yourself, like, are you really? I mean, it is kind of the middle of the winter, and like it would be so much more interesting to say, well, I'm doing pretty well, but here's what I've been struggling with lately, or whatever, regardless of what the motivation is, by them doing that, it just offers more authentic communication. And it won't be strange, because I feel like a lot of times I'm that person who's like telling somebody, oh, and this is what I'm going through or whatever. And they're looking at me like thinking, okay, I just wanted to know. I just wanted you to say fine.
Right.
You
No,
know?
I go back and forth because I too think like, okay, should I say fine here and and be positive about my own life? And should I just choose that moment that I think I'm being positive and thinking positively and saying positive things? But that's not how I'm feeling. So which is the one? Which is the
Right.
one that's gonna bring this experience with another person a level of intimacy? Either I'm going to set an example of being positive regardless of the things that are going wrong, because
Right.
I feel like that's a good part of a friendship, or
Right.
I'm going to trust you with this potential baggage that I may be bringing up. And it's a fine line. And I know, like you said, like we're honoring regardless of what the intention or what somebody is, what you think they're trying to do. Because my perspective always been oversharing, you think you're being vulnerable, but in fact, you're not. And you're reminding me like, oh yes, that person is being vulnerable. Maybe not in the way that they think they are, but if I know better, then I know that they're sharing something that is vulnerable, and I can choose to develop intimacy if I want to. Like, or I can roll my eyes and go, "Ugh, I don't want to hear the drama." Or I could say, wow, to myself, that's a lot of drama. This person needs to talk about that drama, vent or whatever. Why does it trigger, why do I care what their intention is? Why do I care? They
Right.
express vulnerability.
Right. It's not our job to
Not
figure
our
that
job.
out.
Right.
It's just, to be in the moment of like, oh, okay. I mean, I get it. Like if you have somebody who's complaining all the time, every time you see them and they start to share and you're just like, ah, here we go. No, I get that.
Or what about people that cry all the time? Like, that people say, oh, I cried everything. I cry at commercials, or I cry at movies, or I cry. You tell me something beautiful, and you see people cry all the time. That their instant response is tears. And, uh, you know, there's a part of me that feels like I don't believe it, or am I just too upset that somebody else can choose to be that vulnerable with the world around them in a way that I wish I could be? I don't know.
Yeah, because
But
I'm one of those people. I mean, I really can cry for anything. Um, And if somebody thought that I was, doing this for attention, like that would really bum me out. Like now I'm thinking like, I wonder what people think all this time I'm getting vulnerable, because it's just my natural state. I'm a Cancer. We're very, sensitive people. And I don't know how to be anything but that, but I'm sure it's perceived like, oh, here she goes again. My kids are always like, don't cry, mom, but why not? Why
I mean,
not?
why wouldn't you? If that's how you feel, why wouldn't you let the tears flow? Of
Right.
course,
And
men,
maybe we normalize that then.
right,
Everyone's taking all these medications for depression and anxiety and things like that. I mean, maybe it's because we've always been taught to like subdue everything,
right,
don't talk about it. Don't show that that's weak. But it's
right.
not
It's
weak.
weakness.
It's
It's
part
not
of who we are. It's as
strength.
part
Yeah.
as laughing as it is crying. Um, so okay, so we're about to run out of time. I just have one last idea. Well, first of all, my parting thought would be, let yourself be vulnerable, regardless of what people might be thinking. That's their problem. That's their ego. It is more important that you get out what you're feeling, because that keeps you like energetically a really good channel. But I also wanted to say it'd be really neat also. You ever like get naked and stand in front of the mirror? That's vulnerable. I know we don't really have time to talk about all that,
No,
but
and that's a great. So I was just telling you about a movie right before we started here, and the very last scene of the movie is the lead character doing just that. And talk about vulnerability. This movie is it shows vulnerability at its greatest, because you see this one character and how she is invulnerable, but she's also vulnerable in all the ways that she expresses this invulnerability. So I think, yes, good luck to you, Leo Grande. Movie very much about vulnerability. So highly recommend that, because it
yeah,
shows somebody revealing themselves while they protect.
yeah. So stand in front of a mirror, see how you feel, and then and let yourself feel that awkwardness, that vulnerability. And also another thing, exercise to do, which I learned from Louise Hay, is you know look at your face in a mirror and don't look away, and see yourself, really see yourself, not for the lines and all of that, but they say if you stare at yourself long enough, you start to see to your soul. But most of us feel so uncomfortable that we look away before that happens. But it's like, I guess my point is to be as naked as you can, both figuratively,
Yes,
and is figuratively and physically, they're different, right?
and literally, yeah, yeah, physically.
Literally. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Like,
you're right. I mean, I think the nakedness is an important thing. Like, so it is a feeling of nakedness to be vulnerable. Like you've just said something
yeah.
and you feel bare, and it can be exhilarating if you allow it to be. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great vulnerability, is a nakedness in some way.
Yeah. So get vulnerable, everyone. And
Get naked.
we'll see you next time with something else that'll make you
Think.
and feel uncomfortable and
And
vulnerable.
vulnerable. Extremely. Yes.
Bye.